Hi there, my name is Kelley Cody Grimm.
And I'm Max Grimm.
And we are Creative Actors Lab. What we want to do is just talk a little bit about how you can bring creativity into your everyday life. Hello, everybody.
Here we are again.
All right. So, do you want to introduce what the topic is of this particular podcast?
Why not?
Why the fuck
this
not?
was actually this is actually a suggestion from one of our. I'm hesitant to say students because I feel like I'm just as much of a fellow student as anybody. But Carlos actually came up with this one, wanting to know about the various assorted horror stories and the war stories that we have individually and collectively encountered over the course of years. And there's been quite a few. This I will say to start off, one thing that really colored a lot of well, both of us, but more so me, was the time and place that we were in. It was Miami, Florida in the 1980s, and there was a lot of drugs, first of all. That colored a lot of the productions that I was involved in, and it was not in any sort of romantic, cool, rock and roll sort of way. It was a nightmare. It was terrible. I saw cocaine ruin people's lives. I am very grateful that I managed to avoid all of that. Because it was something that was very prevalent back then, and it caused a lot of problems in a lot of productions that I was in at the time. But that being said, there's also the thing about actors' egos,
yes.
And that tends to really screw things up sometimes. But so just in no particular order, we're going to share some horror stories. And personally, I'm not going to mention names or specifics unless it is something really positive, because there was some fairly embarrassing stuff. I'll start. I remember once being on stage in front of 800 people, and I was really tired, and I was a cigarette smoker at the time, and I lost my voice on stage in front of 800 people in mid-show. And it was the sort of a thing to where I wasn't feeling good, and I was really tired, and I was just really stressed out about a lot of things. There I am in the middle of the show, and in the middle of a line, my voice went, and I had to go through the rest of the show. Basically, every line that I said, I had to, consciously get the air into the diaphragm and put out the words in the best way that I could. And it was horrible. And when my voice went kersplat in the middle of everything, being in front of 800 people and hearing 800 people go, it's terrifying. That was, and somehow or other, I managed to make it through the end of the show. All of my fellow actors were just very concerned about me and everything, and I just, and of course I had to do shows the next day, and it was an absolute nightmare. And I kind of brought it on myself, really. But yeah, losing my voice in front of 800 people, that was a terrible thing.
Okay.
Your turn.
All right. Well, I'll harken all the way back to high school. And my very first foray into Shakespeare, and interestingly enough, it actually ended up being the play that you and I really kind of fell in love in, was A Midsummer Night's Dream. And I had been cast as Titania. So my drama teacher at the time decided I'm not going to go the traditional, all nice and flowy and romantic and flowers and everything. He wanted to do the bare stage Peter Brook version, which meant we were all very streamlined down, just very simple robes and things like that, which if you're Brian Cox and Helen Mirren and you've done a lot of Shakespeare, you can carry that off. If you're high school kids who don't understand the basic cadence and don't really know iambic pentameter, tend to end at every line because that's how you've memorized that. We've talked about memorization patterns. So on top of that, he wanted us to be professional, and so I had this platform that came down, and it was a hanging platform that was on chains. And so at the point that Titania's scene comes in with Bottom, on top of which he wanted all the sets to be done in complete darkness. And so, again, you've got backstage kids not really knowing, so there weren't any work lights. I don't think he really understood how high school drama worked. And that is just more stories for another day. But anyway, so they thought they had hung the platform up. Me and Bottom get up, and yes, can you imagine what I'm about to say?
Yeah.
It went boom, and we fell down. And I think I actually ad-libbed it was the wrath of Theseus or the wrath of Oberon, yes. So I'm like, why am I like, yeah, the wrath of Oberon. So me and the guy who were playing Bottom, we got up and we had both been doing it. So we kind of improvised some Shakespeare to get up and go around it. So the audience kind of thought that was supposed to happen. But then, the drama teacher was like, how could that have happened? And what did you guys do to sit on the platform wrong? And it was like, you had them trying to put a platform on hooks and they didn't have it hooked all the way. I don't know what to tell you, but... So yeah, if you're any high school teachers out there thinking of doing a Midsummer Night's Dream, go traditional and let your stage crew be able to see what the blarg they are changing, because otherwise the person you could hurt might be the Queen of the Fairies and the actor named Bottom. But anyway, so that was just one of my beginning horror stories.
Okay, that's a good one.
I don't know if I've ever told you that.
No, that one doesn't sound familiar actually. Yeah. Let's see. I remember once being in a production. It was a big cast. It was like 20-some people in the cast, and everybody's on stage, pretty much all at once, and had a fight scene. This choreographed fight scene. Between myself and two other guys. And this, of course, was Miami, Florida, and in its drug-infested heyday. And the two guys that I was in the scene with, they just thought before the show, wouldn't it be a great idea if these two guys took some LSD prior to the show? Because they thought it would help with their character, and it was all methody and all this stuff. But these guys are on stage, and I have to interact with them in the play a lot. And at one point, I'm just looking, going, what is wrong with you guys? And at some point, it might have been an intermission or something like that. We took acid, dude. And they were just, and I mean, anything about like dialogue and blocking and lines and it's out the window. These guys are just on stage tripping on acid. And they were just screwing up and screwing up and screwing up. And when it came time for the fight scene, I had about had it. And Nice Max kind of went away for a moment, and when it came to the fight scene, I actually punched one of them right in the face. And I'm just like, get it together now. And they just sort of, and they held it together as best they could. But after the show, I was like, why did you do that, dude? And I'm like, and that was actually one of the things I will say that was sort of precipitated me actually staying away from acting for about 20 years. Because I was just, there was so much bad behavior, and in that show in particular, there was a lot of drug use. There was a lot of cocaine going around backstage and all that sort of thing. And I was at an age at that point where it's like, I'm not playing this. I had it with these actors, and I did plenty of it myself back in the day. But I just got to a point of like, okay, I'm done with this drug nonsense. And I had just seen so much of it that I had come to a point of like, I just had this great love of acting and all this bad behavior surrounding it. And it's like, I can't be doing this thing that I love so much around these people who were just disrespecting it. That night in particular got me to thinking, it's like, I don't think I want to act anymore if this is how it's going to be. Yeah, I've got others, but that was, but the thing I'll say in general, as far as, the horror stories and the war stories that, we both have is, I think I speak for my partner here as well as myself about this inexplicable great love for the art of acting. And when you see people kind of come into it and the narcissism and the egotism and all that sort of a thing just takes over, tends to punch a big hole in my chest about pursuing this thing that I love if I'm going to see it just disrespected and like that. And it was because of things like that I actually stayed away from acting for about 20 years. And no desire to in directings, which is what I really love to do. It just went away for about 20 years, and I am very grateful, and I will mention a name here specifically to Lance from Acting Out Studios for making the suggestion of I start teaching acting. And all I can say is that when I did, even though I had been away from it for 20 years, I basically was like Lance kind of turned on the faucet and Niagara Falls came out. And for that, I'm very, very grateful. But there were a lot of things that really, I didn't lose my love of acting, but I couldn't participate in it when, I was seeing so much of the bad behavior that I was seeing. So.
Yeah. And and I think because you and I have, what is interesting about teaching acting on Zoom and, just listening to monologues and things like that, the downside is you can't really get as much into the physicality of a particular character because you're only, if you're actually watching this on YouTube, we're recording this on Zoom as well. So, you got from the shoulders up to really get people, you may be able to go a little further back in the room and get that. But what is interesting, though, is that you can have people from hundreds, maybe even thousands of miles away. I'm here, we're here in Georgia. I actually, in one class, had 2 young ladies in California that wanted coaching. And then in between, I had people
Seattle.
in Louisiana and Seattle. And, so it's like, I couldn't do that if we were still teaching in Norcross and having people. The furthest away a lot of people would come would be from Alabama, and that's a 2-hour ride to take a 2-hour, 3-hour class and then turn right around and drive back for 2 hours. I really felt for them. So, the beauty of Zoom is you are able to get, some of the basics, but not, maybe again, the more intensive movement and things like that. And, I will tell you, if you do have HBO, and this show is definitely not for kids, there is a show called Barry. And what is really hilarious is I think the people there are like distilling all the bad advice that they've gotten from acting. And Gene Cousineau and his student Sally, and, just their adherence. And, he has a book, and one of the chapter titles are like, listen with your ears, react with your face. Very basic stuff. But, some of the stuff that he does just isn't very nice. And the reason I'm saying that is kind of leading into when I was in a class that I think was quasi-method. I don't even know if it was method. But we would kind of go off, and the teacher would tell us, I want you to do these scenes. So there was this younger guy, and he, I think, had maybe read one book on method acting, or maybe just skimmed the chapters. And which story I'm going to tell you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So we're sitting there, and beforehand he's like, I'm just like so pissed at my girlfriend right now. And I'm like, well, okay, maybe you could use that. I had no idea that in the course of the scene he was going to grab me by the arms and shake me violently, and shake me so violently that I couldn't even call out for help. And I think there were people that weren't that far, maybe 10 feet away, all of a sudden heard me going, and then they looked and they're like, hey. The teacher stepped in and said, what was going on? And he's like, I've been studying method acting. And so when she was supposed to play my girlfriend, I just wanted to take all the anger that I had at my girlfriend and just work it through the scene, which was, and I will tell you, the next day I had bruises on my arms from where he had grabbed him.
I wasn't there for that, but I remember when this happened. Yeah.
And, and at the time, this was kids before you had cell phones. And we really didn't know his phone number, but if I had, I would have called his girlfriend and said, you need to get out now. You need to leave now. This is bad. This is super bad. After that, he didn't come back to the class, but, what ended up happening was the teacher, rather than saying, you cannot freaking ever do that again, freakhead, and trust me, that's not the F word I want to use, but the problem was, oh, well, we discussed it, and it was a little bit legitimized because, like, oh my gosh, she was just so into the moment and everything. So, again, when you're doing scenes on Zoom, you're not able to do the physicality, but in some ways it might be good, because if you do have a guy who's a little psychotic with his girlfriend, you're not going to get grabbed and shaken.
Yeah, I think that's method acting can be a very, very dangerous in the hands of people that really don't understand it.
Yes.
It's, I think anytime you get into the thing where it's like you start blurring the lines between your life and your character's life, that's a very slippery slope.
It's one thing if you're doing a scene at a wedding and you're very happy and you had a very good experience at your wedding, or maybe you've never been married and you're substituting a happy birthday or anniversary party for your wedding. That is totally cool. But if you are substituting a trauma to a trauma or anger to an anger,
I can tell. That does make me think of. I was acting my father had passed away about 4 to 6 months prior to this, and there came a scene to where I thought to myself, "Oh, I'll just use the emotion and the trauma that I went through of my father passing away." And when it came time to do the scene, I could not do it. I could not. I just froze. Which is not something I really have ever done in acting, but that was just like, I'm not ready to process this. And even like we're going on 25-something years since Dad passed away, I'm not sure I could even do it now, to be honest. But, I think in acting, if it's when I think, Carlos was, suggesting this, it was like, kind of the cautionary tales.
Yeah.
And one thing, just as I've been thinking about this topic, is, acting is the sort of thing that it's a very communal sort of an art. Painters go into their studio and they have their canvas and their brushes and their paints. Writers, they have their word processors and all that. In acting, you really need other people. And what I would say to anybody, especially even if you're not new to acting, but be very aware of the company you keep. Directors, your instructors, your agents. There's the first 2 agents I ever tried, and I think I was about 19 years old when I started this. I remember calling one agency, and this was Miami, Florida. I don't know what it's like now, but back then there was a huge amount of pornography that got produced down there at that time. And I called one agency, and no idea. I was, and I'm on the phone with this agent. We're having this great conversation. I'm going, I'm going to get me an agent. And he basically said, come on to the office for a meeting and all this. And let's have this great conversation. And he said to me at the close of the conversation, and oh, by the way, just so you know about the office, this is a casual office, and clothing is optional should you choose to wear it. Click. And I don't think I'm going to go to that.
Well, at least you knew before you walked in and then got a surprise.
And then the second agent that I tried, I found out after the fact that this agent also, they basically did like extras for stuff, but there was a lot of pornography, and I came to actually meet the guy who started the agency, years after the fact, and his whole thing was just, casting couch. That was the main reason that he had this. But I just remember going into this agent's office, and this woman comes out, and she gets one look at me with my hair and the tattoos and the whole business, and she walks in and she immediately starts screaming at me about, what am I can't, what kind of people are they sending me? I can't work with. Just yelling, belittling, insulting me, and I'm 19 years old and brand new to this stuff, and this woman was she excoriated me. And I don't know what had happened prior to her walking in the door, but I suspect it probably has something to do with her boss's bad behavior. But she just excoriated me, basically told me to never come back. I will never work. It's all. I mean, she just. It was unbelievable. It was just unbelievable just to have this person walk through the door and immediately start yelling and saying, you need to get out of here and you're terrible. And I'm basically sitting there, in a chair breathing, and that's how it started. To any of these stories is with acting, really with anything, just be aware of the company that you keep.
And if it doesn't feel right, listen to your gut.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's actually new studies now that saying your gut actually can process strong emotions faster than your brain. So your gut's your second brain. So literally, if your gut instinct is, I'm getting the heebie-jeebies here, then, find a way to exit the situation. I mean, the good news is, unlike when we were in there, you couldn't really do a Google search and you couldn't see what there were Yelp reviews or things like that. But yeah, just be super, super careful. I mean, I went to an agent one time and they told me that I couldn't get any work done unless I got a boob job. That they would represent me. If I came back with a boob job, then they would think about it. And I just kind of went, and thank you, and seen. That wasn't, obviously what I felt like I wanted my talents to be focused on. And then I, developed the love of improv and things like that. But I mean, that's really, if you're in a situation where people, and Max and I have experienced that, where they're like, hey, really would love to use you. But you know what? I think that you would, rather than just having just a plain old acting credit, maybe you would like to have an executive producer credit. And so in order to get that executive producer credit, we only need a few $1,000s to help with our project, but then you would have that on your resume. I mean, now you would say IMBD or whatever. But what I would tell you is, and if you and we did talk to a mom recently that's exactly what happened, is she handed over some money, they took it, and she never heard anything back. So don't, if you're going in there to be an actor, you are going in there to be an actor. Do not have people ask you for money. If they're an agent, I mean, some agents will say, hey, it's a $20 registration fee to get your headshot up or whatever. I mean, okay.
That's one thing.
That's one thing, because they do have a lot of people come in and then never do anything. So if they're going to go through the trouble of putting your headshot and your resume up online, and they have to pay somebody an hour to do that, then okay, the $20, that's fine. But if an agent is asking you a few $100 or a few $1,000s to represent you because they've gotten in at Marvel, again, that's a flag sign.
That was the third agent I think I went to. I was very fortunate in that I only got taken for about $90.
Yeah.
But I gave this agent $90, and I didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks, and I'm calling and there's no answer. And so I go by the office, and they had literally moved. They had moved the entire office.
Yeah.
Never heard from them again. So, I mean, but I've heard stories from people. It's way worse. I've heard somebody actually use numbers like $4,000 and $5,000 they got taken for.
Yeah, and so don't. I mean, you should not be paying someone to act. If they want you to be in their project, if it's a student film or like a SCAD or something like that, and that's a arts university here in Georgia, okay, fine. If it's and they're telling you up front they're not going to pay you, but they will give you footage and they'll give you meals, that's fine. That's how a lot of people get experience. However, they should not be charging you to do that.
Yeah.
And if you are a filmmaker who is just starting out, also be very aware. There's a lot of film festival scams out there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, some of it is, hey, we'll read your script for $500 or whatever. We'll give you back notes. I mean, a lot of the time, if they are going to do that, it's maybe about $150. If that's something you feel that you need to do, I would tell you quite honestly, get into a good critique group and have other screenwriters read it and give you feedback, and then you read theirs and you give them feedback. So it's reciprocal. Be very aware of monthly film festivals because it takes nothing to go in and generate laurels. and I would like to try to produce that at some point in the next year and a half, but I've actually created a mockumentary film festival called the Bless Your Heart Film Festival. I've already created the laurels. I already have an Acting Ugly award at the Bless Your Heart Film Festival. So it doesn't take anything, but a lot of times the monthly film festivals, if they can get 100 people to give them $20 a month, that's $2,000. And then they'll send you laurels. Okay, fine. And then you can put that on there. But, if it's Pahokee, New Jersey Film Festival and Comedy Festival with a little bit of Shakespeare, and it's just a little bit of everything, then, just think about that. Mm-hmm. But, you've been on film sets where there's been people that have been less than kind, people who've thrown fits. And that's, I'll be honest with you, that to me, just with the number of movies I've done, particularly here in Georgia, that's the exception rather than the rule. Usually they're pretty nice, but my advice, though, is if you want to see how a set is run, do background work. And you'll learn the good and the bad. I will tell you a really positive one I had was recently working on a Fairley Brothers movie. It was 4 days and the weather was kind of up and down, but at the very end, what they did was the director and the director of photography got up on a piece, like a box, and thanked everybody for everything that they went through. And I went, man, that is a class act, because a lot of times background people aren't being acknowledged. So the fact that they took the time to recognize background, I thought was very, very cool and extremely classy. Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, I remember from back in the day, and I'm not going to mention the name, but there was a very, very popular TV show being filmed in Miami. Not going to mention the name, but y'all can figure out the time and place. You can, but I remember the first time I was on the director of photography, who was a great director of photography and a terrible human being. Mm-hmm. I watched this guy. He literally shoved a little woman. I mean, the guy was like my height and bigger than me and everything.
6'4", yeah.
And this woman in particular was the nicest, sweetest person, but she was maybe 5'1" and skinny as my little finger. And she was walking in front of him, and he literally slammed her into the wall just so he could walk by. It was on that same show at a different time. Our home base was kind of this, basically a cheap kind of a transient hotel. And that's where they did the costuming and they did all the makeup and they did all that stuff. And while we were shooting, somebody broke into the women's side, and I think they had like a whole floor of this. They had rented out a whole floor of this hotel in the seedy, terrible part of Miami Beach before it was South Beach. Somebody broke into the women's side of the thing, stole everyone's purse. They got car keys, they got wallets, they got credit cards, they got everything. It was just nuts back then. I will say also, I think it was Cameron McIntosh who said something like the single most foolish thing you can do with money is to produce theater, and I would tend to agree with that, realistically. But back then, I worked for a couple of different theater companies who would do these educational plays, and they'd get contracts with the school board, and we would go out, amongst all these schools and everything, and we would do these educational plays. I remember one time doing a shortened version of No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre for high school audiences. That was a weird one. But I was basically the stage manager. I was like the tour manager. I did act in addition to that on a couple of productions, but not too much. I was kind of the liaison and the lighting guy and the costume person and the driver and everything. But we went into, I won't say every school in Miami-Dade County, but we went into most, and particularly high schools, and we would do these educational plays. There were some schools we went into that basically, for these kids who were there, the next step is going to be jail. And it was this happened on a couple of occasions. I almost got jumped. I almost got assaulted a couple times by gangs of kids. I mean, these like high school kids who, big, kids, and I managed to. All I'll say is guardian angels were really looking out for me that day. But this happened on a couple of occasions to where I was almost assaulted, and I managed to thankfully, get away. Or I remember at one point some assistant principals just like intervened as it was. I was the next thing that I was going to have to do was start getting violent with people, which I am not. That's not in my wheelhouse, let's just say. But I was, but I had gotten pushed that far. If I were to survive, I was going to have to fight for myself. So that happened on a couple of occasions. And I even remember in one of these particular occasions, there was sort of like, I walked into the school early in the morning and walked into the main office and said, "Hi, I'm Max. We're from such and such theater company. We're here to do the show," and blah blah blah, and all this sort of thing. And the people in the front office are like, "Okay, cool, that's fine." And there's this one teacher. This guy said, "Here, there was a secret elevator in the very center of the school, and you had to go through the principal's office and all this. And there was this elevator that, apparently the students didn't know about. So this teacher, this older guy, and I get into the elevator. It's like, here, let me show you where to go and all this." We get in the elevator and the doors close, and he asked me what I was there to do, and I, told him, and he said, "Hey, that's great. Too bad the information is going to be wasted on these monkeys." Were this first thing that came out of his mouth. And then for this whole elevator ride up to the fourth floor, the third or fourth floor of this place, he cut loose with every racial slur, every ugly thing that came out of his mouth in the short period of time. I mean, it was, and I went, "This is your teacher. Good luck, guys." But there was that, and I will say also, I guess, this is life. If you're going to be active, if you're going to do whatever in life, there's going to be situations to where it's just, especially if it's something you love, you've got to be you've got to be careful of the company you keep. You've got to know your own worth. If something doesn't feel right, get out. And there were times that I did not do that, and I really regretted it. And I will say this: this one story I will tell. It was one of the things where I didn't realize my value as a human being and as a creative person. I just thought I had to take it. But I was in a dance company, and the person who was in charge of it was really just not a very nice person. She wasn't the greatest choreographer, and she wasn't the greatest director, but she was really took a lot of joy in being this miserable person. She liked to be called the Dragon Lady. And we were doing a rehearsal at one point, and I was tired. I think I was about 21 years old at the time. I was really tired. I didn't stretch out. I didn't warm up. We went to practice this one number. I went to do some kind of high kick or some dance move, and I felt my left hamstring just go pop. Ooh. And it hurt, and it's. I would imagine that's what it feels like to be stabbed with like a red hot dagger. It hurt so much, but I kept going and I kept smiling, and and we went through all of this. So after about 30 minutes of practicing, we finished. I had about a 20-minute break. I sat down and just in shivering, horrible pain. And then I went after that break to stand up to practice the next number, and I couldn't stand. I mean, and this, the long and short of this story, this injury rather, actually I could feel it for about 20 years. I was feeling where I had injured myself, and I remember being 40 years old and going, wow, this was 19 years ago, and I can still feel where I hurt myself. And to be honest, I was not the worst dancer, but I wasn't the greatest one either, and I really wanted to be acting. And so I had this injury, and there was an audition coming up for something, and I remember saying to the choreographer, I was like, I think I need to go. This person turned around and shrieked at me, and talking about how people always screw this person over, and I'm a terrible person for doing this, and I'm very selfish, and I'm this and that, and I basically toughed it out. For the next about 5 months, I finished out the season. I did all the shows. I was in miserable pain the whole time. Maybe 10 years ago, so, one of my dance partners from back then and I made contact. And, and she was like, do you remember the dance company? And I was like, I said that here's the thing I will say about that, is I do not have a lot of regrets in my life. However, staying with that dance company for as long as I did, that is one of the regrets I truly have. I mean, because I was up on stage, I was performing, but I was so miserable. And the choreographer was, creating this environment that just sort of fueled all this other nasty behavior and all this backbiting and all the things you've ever heard about, egotistical dancers and the narcissism. And it's true. Oh, it's true. And I stayed with it. I stayed with it for about 5 or 6 months after the injury, and I really, really regretted it. And if I could say anything to anybody out there, whether you're an actor or you're a whatever you are, don't put yourself through that. Yeah. You're better than that. None of us are perfect. None of us know everything there is to know about anything. But at the same time, be aware of your self-worth and treat yourself accordingly. And that is what I did not do. And that is truly one of the few regrets I have in my life. So there.
And I mean, I will just tell you that, as we've talked about, the bulk of my career has really been doing improv. And it's so interesting when you hear other women who've done improv, like Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, and even Joan Rivers talked about being run out of a comedy group pretty much on a rail, and that had happened to me. And I think when those things happen, you've got to decide for yourself. This is part of the journey. So when I got, and I would sometimes stand up, we'd get ready to do a scene, and one of the other actors would just shoot with a tirade, tell me how flat-chested I was, how no guy would ever want me. And, he's doing this in the thing of, it's a comedy thing. It's a comedy bit. But it was very insulting. And, and I'd roll with it on stage. But even after that, I remember his roommate coming up to him and going, dude, what were you doing? That was just mean. Oh, it was just a bit, but yeah, look at her. She's flat-chested. And I'm like, well, you've got a grasp for the obvious, but okay, shut up about it. I'm not making jokes about your appearance and how big your nose is. But from out of that, what I ended up doing was founding 2 different improv troupes that was run by a woman. So I had more women who felt comfortable wanting to come to me and perform in my group, and then guys understanding that the dynamic was I'm leading this thing. And I did have a little power play here and there with some of the guys, but it's like, hey, at the end of the day, this is OTC comedy troupe or eclectic company. Either you're with me or there's lots of other improv troupes around. I mean, I think particularly in the comedy business, I think women in particular, I would like to think that it's changed a good bit, but just my experience again, and when you would hear stuff even like, from Saturday Night Live, and John Belushi would sit there and go, yeah, the women aren't funny. We'll just put them in sketches, but the women aren't funny. And you're like going, wait a minute, Gilda Radner, Lorraine Newman, Jane Curtin, they're all hilarious. I grew up on Carol Burnett and Mary Tyler Moore and, all very funny women, but what I will tell you is sometimes those setbacks and even having people go, okay, you're out of the group. If you really want it bad enough, you will find a way back and you will offer opportunities, as I was able to other women and then other people that may have been marginalized in other improv troupes and say, hey, we're going to try something new. It's going to be new. It's going to be different. Let's go in that direction. So sometimes what I would say is, maybe out of the horror stories, as you're rising, the phoenix rising out of the ashes, understand that this may be a very tough redirect, but where you were going was not going to make you happy. And you were just putting up with things. So in a way, they did you a favor by saying you're out, so that you could go in another direction that was going to be happy. Yeah. I have found that in theater. I have found that professionally, doing nonprofits and things like that. So, sometimes it's painful and we don't always see it, But when you can, I have the distance now. I've got a few decades to sit back and go, oh yeah, if I had stayed there, it would have killed my desire to do it.
Yeah.
Them kicking me out was a gift that I didn't realize at the time, because I got out before the toxicity really smothered any love or comedy or sense of self out of that. So, when you guys do get those setbacks, and we all do, again, whether you're doing nonprofit work, whether you're in retail or whatever you're going to have those people, and depending on your belief system, I think sometimes there's a guardian angel that's going, you're not happy here, and we just need to get you out. And if you're just going to sit here and meander, and you're going to take it and take it and take it, sometimes something big smack has to happen, and then you take that step and you go, okay, I'm out of here.
Well, I will just say, as far as that goes, I actually remember, and this was before we dated or anything like that, but we had been in some shows together, and I remember getting a phone call from you I think it was a Sunday afternoon, and you were just very adamant and very I remember you were asking me about different actors who had auditioned for me, and what did I know about this person, and what did I know about that person, and so on and so forth, and you're asking me all this stuff, and I'm just thinking to myself, like, okay, what's really going on here?
I had to talk to my buddy Max.
But I was just like, what's there's something in her voice that was not there before, and she's like, I'm going to start this troupe, and I'm going to, and I want to know who I'm working with, but there was this determination. And I was just like, yeah, okay, there's something else going on here. There's some subtext that I don't know about, but here we are, and
all these decades later,
and then after a while, I discovered, like, oh, that's what that phone call was really about. Okay.
Yeah. Because, and that's the thing, besides loving you as my husband and life partner, but so often a lot of the men that I went out with didn't respect my talent, or just didn't think that I could go ahead and do it. And there's never been a minute with Max when I've thrown out ideas that he hasn't said yes and go for it. And same thing with you. I know you're looking at wanting to do a one-man show, and my thing is, go for it. Go ahead and try it.
Well,
Why not?
I think also it's at a point where you if you think the other person is going to do something, that there's going to be some problems, you owe it to say it to them. If you really care for the person, if you really if you're very sincere, and it's something that I think there may be problems with this and this. Well, none of us are going to like to hear that in the first place,
exactly.
but in the long term, it's like, I'm really glad they said something, because exactly. that could have been a nightmare.
And I think if it's coming from someone that understands your talent and who you are, and it's not from, you're not talented enough to do this, you're not good enough to do it, but it's more, you may not be seeing the whole situation here. I'm not as involved, so I can step back and maybe give you A, B, and C. At the end of the day, it's your decision. I'm not going to forbid you from doing it, but at the end of the day, it's your decision. And I think when you have someone in your corner, like I've had in my corner, thankfully, it does make a world of difference.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just say also, I think people in general, but particularly men, can get very scared and intimidated by strong, intelligent women, and they try to. And it's human nature, rather than, as Mahatma Gandhi said something about how it's one of the sad aspects of human nature is that rather than trying to make yourself a better person, you take the people around you who are doing good things and you try to knock them down, and you sort of have this optical illusion of, it's like, you're not getting better, you're making them smaller. And and really, at some point or other, everybody receives that kind of treatment, but particularly men around strong, intelligent women, they get scared, they get intimidated, and they do dumb stuff like that. They do, and it's a shame, particularly with acting, because you sort of, as an actor, you have to have this very tough part of you that's going to get all the rejections. And believe, stick around and acting long enough, you will get a ton of rejections.
You may get run out of improv troops.
And some people may give you those rejections that are, less than eloquent, to put it nicely. But at the same time, you have to be you sort of have to have this rawness of, being able to feel and express these different emotions that characters have, and it's a very precarious equilibrium to maintain a lot of the time for actors. But particularly in this, in this line of work, whether it's a conscious or a subconscious thing with some of these people, I don't know. But when they start putting other people down, we as actors, we do have that raw nerve. Part of our in our toolbox, and sometimes, boy, that stuff can really hit in the wrong way, and it makes you want to do things like never act again.
And sometimes the
That's
way
a tragedy.
to respond to that person might be, and someone said this is a good emotional intelligence response. If you have somebody that's just said something very insulting, pause for a second, look at them and go, "Are you okay?" And then it makes them, you're not being accusatory, you're not returning back, but it may have them sit back and go, did I say what's not okay? It's going to give them pause at the very least for you to go, you know what, why don't I go? And then you can get yourself out of there. But yeah, just the simple thing of, hey, are you okay? You're inquiring, it may be sincere, but it may also be giving you a chance just to say, I need to let you know that what you just said about me being flat-chested, if I had known that, might have saved me some a lot of anxiety and things like that. But anyway, anything else?
I just hope this helps. Whether you're going to act or whatever you're going to do
in life, this just happens, and it's so much how you react to it. And more often than not, sometimes it can be that you're not seeing the whole situation. Sometimes it can be you're inexperienced and you may be plowing forward without seeing everything. But sometimes it may just be those, as Max said, those people, rather than building, it takes more energy to build people up, but at the back end it gives you energy, but it takes less energy to pull people down, but then the negative energy makes you feel drained. So what I would say is just, if you're in that situation, know when you need to back out of the room, and then just take some time for yourself. But again, I hope this has helped. We've been around for a minute, and we just want to make sure that you guys have as good an experience as you have. But then if you have not so good ones, sometimes if you can step back and look at that as this was a gift of redirection. I didn't know that at the time, but I'm very grateful. Thank you, universe.
Yeah.
We appreciate you guys tuning in, and keep in mind that you can catch us on our social media, Creative Actors Lab on Instagram and Facebook, and by the same name on YouTube. And for more on what we do, you can go to our website,
creativeactorslab.com, all one word. Thank you for listening. Stay curious, make art.org. Much love until next time.